Welcome to Ruger Tech Tips. I'm going to show you how to reassemble your Ruger small frame AR rifle. Before I begin, I want to make sure there's no live ammunition in the rifle, in the magazine, or in my work area. So I'm going to visibly and physically check my chamber, make sure that's clear, my magazine, and my workspace. And there's no live ammo, so I can start. So a couple tools you're going to need. You're going to need a torque wrench that runs between 44 and 55 inch-pounds of torque. It's going to need a 5/32 drive on that. I'm going to need a 3/16 ball end Allen wrench as well as a 5/32 Allen wrench. This one doesn't need the ball end to it, and I'm going to need a 1/16 punch as well as a good pair of safety glasses. So to begin with, I'm going to build up my bolt carrier assembly. I've got all these parts here, so I'm going to start with that. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to build the bolt. I'm going to need the bolt itself, the extractor, and there's a solid pin that goes to that. Now on the end of my extractor, you can see there's a spring here, and then there's kind of the claw hook on the end that grabs the cartridge. So this is just going to sit inside of here, and you can compress that with your finger. This hole, it's non-directional which direction this pin goes in, and I typically will line that up with a bright surface so I can see that hole is clear all the way through. I'll take the back side of my punch and I'll just push that on there and just push that through. And you just want to get it even on each side so it sits in the middle. As long as I have my punch in my hand, I'm just going to make sure it works. I'm going to compress that all the way. And I'm also going to check my ejectors. I'm going to push those two pins in, make sure my ejectors got good movement. I'm good there. So I built up my bolt. I'm then going to take my bolt. Now the extractor, the rifle ejects to the right, so my extractor wants to go to the right. So I have my carrier in front of me, my gas port to the front. So my extractor's got to go to the right-hand side. Before you do that, where your gas rings are, you want to make sure that those gaps don't all line up. They want to be offset. So I'll move those around so they're not in alignment. So I'm going to get my bolt in there. You give it a little twist, it'll go in. There's a hole down inside there that my cam pin goes in. I find it a little easier just to pull this slightly ahead, and I can get my cam pin down inside my bolt. So that's going to just slide down. And now we need to turn that 90 degrees. So you're just going to rotate your cam pin 90 degrees like that. So once that's in place, I got my bolt all the way back, I can now insert my firing pin. So I install the firing pin through the rear, all the way down in and fully forward. So now I need to put in my retaining pins. And if you look carefully, these typically will have one leg that is slightly longer than the other leg. So I'm going to orient this, so I want to put these in horizontally, not vertically. So I want to lay it flat, and I want the longer leg towards the front. Makes it a little bit easier to put in. So I put that longer end in first, and I'm going to compress that, and I'm going to push it across. I got to make sure my firing pin's all the way in. Now, you don't want to force this. If you force this, you'll splay those two legs apart, and you won't be able to get them in. If just pushing it in doesn't go in, if you come in behind it with a punch, beside the firing pin, you'll get to the end of that retaining pin, and you can just compress it, and it pushes right in. Okay, don't force it. If you hit that with a hammer or something like that, you will not get that in. So once you've got that built up, I'm going to pull my bolt forward, and that's ready to be installed in the rifle. So let's now do the upper. So I'm going to reinstall my regulator, my gas regulator. So this has, we have our flat where we have our numbers, but we also have a flat on this outer ring, and that's this flat on this outer ring here is going to align with this hood, and this allows us to assemble this. There's also a very small hole in the front here, which is a 1/16. We need to compress, there's a plunger in there, we need to compress that. I put my punch in there, I can feel that. This gas regulator will not go 360 degrees. We have to compress that to get it by. So I'm just going to install this inside on the flat. I can put my punch in there, and I can also come in with my 3/16 Allen wrench. I'm just going to compress the plunger, rotate my gas regulator, and then I can set it to whatever position it needs to be in. So I know this particular rifle, it shoots good with the ammo that I'm using on number 2. I'm going to set it for number 2 and leave it there. So my gas regulator's in place. I'm going to install my handguard, and I'm going to carefully slide this over the barrel. And I'm going to line up the rail of my handguard with the rail of the rifle. I'm going to get those two lined up. When I've got that approximately lined up, you also need to line up where this pivot for my dust cover is with this little cutout right here. So once I've got everything lined up, what I'm going to do then is I can just stand this up on the table and I can compress this back and I can slide those two together. If it doesn't line up, the last little bit, I can tweak those and I can get these to line up nice. So then I'm going to install the 2 screws in here. These are a 5/32 screw. I take my 5/32 hex head wrench. I find it easier if I close the dust cover. It gives me a little bit more clearance. You just want to get those kind of snug, kind of tight, and then you're going to take your torque wrench and you're going to go between 44 and 55 inch-pounds of torque. So we're going to start to tighten this up until this clicks over. And that's 2. So I've got this all set up. Everything looks correct. So we're going to do the lower now, and I'm going to put the buffer and buffer spring in, commonly forgotten to put back into the rifle. So you're just going to push this back in, and there's a spring and plunger, I'll show you here, that it locks into. So if you just push that back in, it's going to catch on that. So I'm going to connect the 2 halves now, and I prefer, rather than just trying to get the pivot in its location, I find it much easier if I close the 2 halves together, and that more easily lines up that front pivot. So if I get it in this position, I can load that in. So now I've got this in this pivot position, and I'll reach into my finger and I'll feel the track at the top of the receiver, and I'll feel that opening where my charging handle, where they have these little lobes that stick out, is going to line up with that. So I got an idea where that is. I stick my charging handle in, it goes up, I slide that forward a couple inches. I've got my bolt carrier assembly. Make sure my bolt is fully forward, so my gas pipe is towards the front. I'm going to slide both of those in together. Make sure that my charging handle, the catch, latches. Bolt goes all the way forward. My hammer's down. My pivot, my takedown pin is out. And now I can close my 2 halves together, and I can put that cross pin through. So my takedown pin is in. So I'm now going to do a function check. I want to make sure that everything I did was correct. The rifle's working the way it is. Again, I'm going to be pulling the trigger on this, so I want to make sure that there's no live ammo in it. So I'm going to double check my chamber before I do my function checks. I'm going to move the safety from fire to safe. I'm going to try to pull the trigger, and I cannot pull that through. So the safety is working. I move it from safe to fire. I'm going to pull the trigger. It fires. I can hear the hammer drop. I keep my finger holding the trigger to the rear, and I'm going to cycle it. And when I release the trigger, I should hear and feel an audible click. So it's coming off the disconnector going to the trigger. I should feel that and hear that. Hear that? So it's released. That's working. And I'm going to do this a couple of times. So everything seems to be working. I'm also checking as I'm pulling my bolt carrier assembly to the rear using the charging handle. I'm seeing how difficult or how easy it is to pull that back. I'm checking for any binding. If it pulls back way too easy, you know you forgot to put your spring in there, so that's a quick clue. But if you want to make sure it works consistently. I'm also going to check my magazine, so I'm going to take an empty magazine. I'm going to install that in, make sure that locks in. It's good and snug. Hit my release, magazine drops out, so that's working. I'm going to check over the whole rifle. I'm going to look for anything obviously wrong with it, cracks, loose screws, anything like that. That might be obvious that there's something wrong with the rifle. But everything seems to check out, so it's good. We put it back together. Everything seems to be working right. So you have successfully reassembled your Ruger small frame AR. Thanks for watching this Ruger Tech Tip.